Ladies and gentlemen, friends, panelists, greetings from Palestine. It is exactly why I could not be in person with you. It is such an honor to join you at Beyond Borders, Scotland, this festival that has become a space where nations, communities, and people fighting for justice can speak and be heard. For many years, you have championed the Women, Peace and Security Fellowship, recognizing the vital role of women in peace building. And today, with the launch of the Scottish Peace Platform, you affirm once again Scotland's deep commitment to dialogue, justice, and those whose voices are too often silenced. For this, the Palestinian people are deeply, deeply grateful. Thank you for the important session, Palestine Matters, which brought together former First Minister, my friend Humza Yousaf, Palestine revered diplomat, Ambassador Afif Safieh, and historian William Dalrymple, in dialogue on Gaza, on Palestine, and Britain's historic responsibilities. And I thank you once again, our friends at the Britain Palestine Project, whose partnership and dedication make such vital discussion possible. Today, the IPC, an internationally recognized body that classifies food insecurities and malnutrition, just declared a famine in Gaza. We have been warning about famine for almost 2 years now and have been met with doubts, bad faith deflections, and shameful silence. And this is not just any famine. Palestinians have not been starving because of a drought or a natural disaster. This is an entirely man-made, live-streamed, and preventable famine. This famine is a result of 2 years of a deliberate, cruel Israeli policy, a decision to use starvation as a weapon of war with full impunity. Is this really the world we are living in today? A world where a child can be starved to death, where parents are forced to watch their children wither away and be powerless to stop it. What do you call this kind of world? What words do we have to describe this evil, this insanity that our people are living? My friends, this genocide will not end because the criminals suddenly decide to stop themselves. We need your help. We need your support. We need your solidarity. We need your humanity, the support of the international community, both governments and people. Britain now stands at a historic turning point in its policy towards Palestine. And we follow with inspiration the growing support and solidarity of the British people. The call from Palestine today is clear. The United Kingdom must move to immediate, unconditional recognition of the state of Palestine. Recognition, long delayed, long overdue, cannot be symbolic. It must be the beginning, only the beginning of action. And action means accountability. War criminals must be held accountable. War criminals must be behind bars. It means sanctions. Sanctions on all illegal Israeli settlements and the government that sponsors these illegal colonial settlements. Sanctions on those responsible for atrocities and crimes, including Benjamin Netanyahu, who is already wanted for war crimes. And it means a full arms embargo, no British weapons, no cooperation, no complicity in the machinery of occupation, in the machinery of colonization, in the machinery of apartheid, and in the machinery of genocide. My friends, this is not the time to lose steam or allow our attention to be diverted. Every act of solidarity, every insistence on the application of international law matters. It keeps hope alive. It keeps our humanity alive. Scotland has already shown how to lead by example, and together we must insist through platforms like this festival that Palestinian voices are heard, that exchanges between civil societies continue, and partnership, and that universities, artists, and communities maintain strong ties even when government falter. And so my message to you today, to Scotland, to the Scottish people and the British people, on behalf of the Palestinian people, is one of gratitude for keeping alive the lights of justice and humanity. Your voices matter. Your solidarity matters. Your action matters. Together, we can ensure that Palestine is not forgotten, even in the darkest hour. That Palestine is not just the cause for the Palestinians. It is a cause for every freedom-loving person in this world. And that Palestine too, one day, will be free. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our panel.
Next one, Billy. You're always taking the main seat. I get to ask the questions today, which is wonderful for the first time in Beyond Borders history. I get to ask the questions. Ladies and gentlemen, that was a fantastic message, powerful message, a rallying cry and a call to action from the incredible, indefatigable spokesperson for the Palestinian people, Dr. Husam Zomlot. I'm saddened that he can't be here, but I know how much he would have liked to have been here if he wasn't in Ramallah. I'm, in one sense, of course, really pleased to be here and to be on this panel and talking on this subject. Of course, we would rather not be speaking about what we're going to be speaking about, because the situation is, of course, beyond horrendous, beyond dystopian, and beyond anybody's worst nightmares. I am going to introduce our panel very shortly, distinguished panel indeed, and I'm going to ask them a couple of opener questions just to give you a bit of time to think about what you want to ask our wonderfully distinguished guests here. And then we're going to try to leave a fair chunk of time for audience contributions as well. I think these gentlemen don't need any introductions, but I'm going to give one anyway. Afif Safieh was born in Jerusalem in 1950. His father, Emil Safieh, a member of the Jordanian parliament and founding member of the Palestinian National Council in 1964. There's no way I can do justice to the wonderful life so far of Dr. Safieh, but what I can say is that he has represented the Palestinian people and Palestinian missions across Europe, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, and the Holy See, also in the United States and Washington. He's also an accomplished author, and his book, The Peace Process from Breakthrough to Breakdown, gained particular critical acclaim. So a distinguished diplomat and an author, we're pleased to have you here. Thank you. I think the other gentleman here also needs no introduction whatsoever. But given that his son Sam is here and his plugging his wonderful book, Shattered Lands, it's fair to say that William Dalrymple is the second most important Dalrymple at Beyond Borders this year. William is, of course, a distinguished historian. He is a best-selling author, an award-winning podcast host, and broadcaster. William Benedict Hamilton Dalrymple was a man of the people who was born...
I knew this was coming.
He's never had me this podcast, that's why. Was born in Edinburgh on the 20th of March 1965, a graduate of Cambridge. He spends his time between Delhi, Scotland and London, I believe. Many best-selling works. My favourites are The Anarchy and The Golden Road, and of course he gave a presentation on the latter last year, which was a riveting talk. He co-hosts the Empire pod with BBC broadcaster Anita Anand, which he just tells me has passed the 85 million download mark. He has been, I think, a long-standing supporter for justice in Palestine, often challenging other historians around the narrative that they have in that regard. So please give William a rousing Let's get straight into some opener questions, and then we'll go to the audience very shortly. If I can come to William first. So most people in this audience, I suspect, will have heard of the Balfour Declaration. They may well have heard of the British Mandate. But it may be the case that they don't know the full history of Britain's involvement in Palestine. Now, you're not going to be able to do that in 5 to 7 minutes, as you have in a moment. But in a nutshell, give us an idea of Britain's involvement from a historical perspective and that unique role, whether that means, of course, the UK has a historic responsibility and a role to try to resolve the issues, and I would suggest not be complicit in them.
So Ambassador Zomlot was very generous to Scotland and said how we've been supporting Palestine and have certainly done a lot better than the English. However, only 39 miles from here, similar sort of estate to Traquair, is an estate called Whittingham on the outskirts of East Lothian, and that is the property of the Balfour family, 39 miles from this place. And in that estate grew up one Arthur Balfour, and when he was born, Palestine's makeup in the late Ottoman Empire was about 85% Muslim, 10% Christian, and 5% Jewish. With the Balfour Declaration, Arthur Balfour, a Scot from these parts, opened the Pandora's box of the Middle East that we're seeing playing out around us today, the declaration of famine that we saw yesterday, being the latest round in the horror after horror after horror, which was by no means inevitable and was directly the result of the political decisions taken in Britain, and primarily by a Scot, Balfour, and a Welshman, Lloyd George. And for a variety of complicated reasons, but to do with pragmatic decisions related to the First World War, those two gentlemen promised Palestine to 3 different groups at the same time. First of all, to have the Middle East shared between Britain and France in the Sykes-Picot Agreement. A year after that promise had been made, Lawrence of Arabia and that whole story promised Palestine to the Sharif of Mecca. And in 1917, 2 weeks after the British had finally broken Ottoman resistance, fighting the same legions who had defeated them at Gallipoli, many of the same soldiers who fought in Gallipoli then went on to defend the trenches in Gaza, in Rafah, exactly the same battleground that we're seeing at the moment. And the Ottoman Turks defeated the British in the first attack on Gaza. They then decided they had to play dirty. So for the first time outside the trenches of Flanders, the British used mustard gas and tanks against an enemy that had no defenses against either and was still defeated. And only after they used colonial troops from India and from Australia did Allenby in 1917 surround Gaza, cut it off, defeat the Ottomans, move into Jerusalem at Christmas, and 2 weeks later, the Balfour Declaration took place. That this country, which had been, like all the Middle East, like all the Levantine coast, enormously mixed and cosmopolitan, with different peoples of different faiths, Jewish, Muslim, Christian, but also minorities like the Druze, like the Yazidis, all these areas, incredibly mixed and cosmopolitan, would become a homeland for the Jewish people, who in his youth had been as little as 5% of the population. That decision opened the floodgates for immigration. That meant that by the 1930s, 25% of Palestine was Jewish and newly arrived immigrants. At that point, the Palestinian revolt broke out, something which none of you will have learnt about in school. There's no movies about this, it's not taught in our syllabuses, but it's crucial to understanding the conflict which is playing out at this moment. We always grew up on films whereby the Gestapo were doing the torturing and brave, plucky Brits were being tortured. We introduced to Palestine a regime of intense torture, displacement, and a whole variety of other horrors. And what we see the IDF do is what our troops taught them to do during the mandate. Namely, aerial attacks led by the young Bomber Harris, who would later go on to organize the Blitz. Bomber Harris with biplanes dropped bombs, attacked Palestinian villages. At the same time, a man called Ord Wingate, who's sometimes referred to as the father of the IDF, who was a Brit, who was a strong Zionist and hated the Arabs, started a campaign of what were called the night raids. And he produced techniques of moving into villages at night, arresting people and torturing them. And the torture methods that they used were the grandparents of the torture methods used in the War on Terror. Particularly waterboarding was a technique started by Ord Wingate against Arab insurgents in Palestine who were resisting the British methods. And you can, the book I'd recommend if you want to be completely horrified by this is a book by a Pulitzer Prize winner and professor at Harvard called Caroline Elkins, who wrote a book called Legacy of Violence. And everything that you have seen in movies the Gestapo do to us, we did to the Palestinians in the 1930s who were trying to resist this. As well as attacking villages, Bomber Harris, for example, would declare an exclusion zone, and anyone that ran out of a village as it was about to be attacked would be attacked from the air with machine guns and gunned down. Bombs would be dropped. Innocent villagers would be killed in large numbers. And in the course of the Palestinian revolt, tens of thousands of innocent Palestinians were gunned down by Brits. Bomber Harris went out hunting Palestinians. He organized hunts on Friday evenings after drinking sessions. And these techniques reached such a peak that by the end of 1939, the Palestinian revolt was exhausted. The leaders of the Palestinian people had been thrown into prisons as far distant as Cyprus and the Seychelles and East Africa, and they were leaderless. So when, in 1945, the British, with a broken economy, began to move towards thinking of withdrawing from Palestine, at the same time as they were withdrawing from India. By 1948, they decided to move out formally, and they left these two forces to fight it out. The Palestinians had been exhausted from the Palestinian revolt, their leaders had been taken from them, and they had been disarmed. At the same time, the immigrants, many of whom were Holocaust refugees who'd fled the camps of the Nazis, it's a very complicated series of moral rights and wrongs. This is not a black and white story. The people who had arrived were fresh from the camps like Auschwitz and Belsen and so on. These guys had been trained up by the likes of Ord Wingate. They had managed to buy arms from Czechoslovakia. And in the same months that the British were withdrawing, there was a mass emigration. There was a mass exodus and a driving out of the Palestinians. 50 villages were cleared. Major urban centers like Jaffa and Haifa were completely cleared of their Palestinian inhabitants. And most of the refugees, some went to the West Bank, some went to Lebanon, but most ended up on the sand dunes of Gaza, where their descendants are now being bombed and starved and subject to a whole variety of horrors every night, including your in-laws. So we often like to think of ourselves in this country as the descendants of sort of Mel Gibson and William Wallace on the scaffold shouting freedom, but this is our responsibility. If it hadn't been for Balfour, quite arguably, none of this would have happened. So we have a deep historic responsibility to add our voice to ask for a state for the Palestinians, which is 75 years too late, but will do something to sort out the mess we have helped create.
Thank you very much. Thank you, William. And of course, as you rightly say, William, none of this taught in our schools, neither in Scotland or, of course, the rest of the UK, which seems like an absolute tragedy and injustice. Yeah. Afif, if I may come to you for an opener, you have, as Dr. Husam said, done a distinguished job of travelling the world, representing your people, often at great personal sacrifice. You've been directly involved in most peace negotiations that have taken place over the decades. You've engaged with many multilateral institutions the world over. I wonder, in your opinion, given the horrific scenes that we are witnessing, including mass starvation, deliberate man-made mass starvation, famine, ethnic cleansing, and I don't doubt genocide, why are those institutions, and therefore the international community, so utterly failing the Palestinian people? And what are the future ramifications of that failure in the region, but possibly globally as well?
Sir, I believe that we, the Palestinians, we have had the misfortune of being the victims of European history. And this is why for decades we never had what we were expecting as legitimate sympathy, solidarity, and understanding. We became the Jews of the Israelis. Yet we never wanted them to become the Palestinians of the Palestinians. This is why, for example, in the 60s, when the Palestinian national movement resurrected, we proposed a unitary state with equal rights and equal obligations to Jews, Christians, and Muslims. It was rejected. We didn't want them to be the Palestinians of the Palestinians. We wanted to break the dialectics of oppression when the former oppressed becomes the oppressor. After the October War of '73, we became unreasonably reasonable. We aligned ourselves on the consensus, the international consensus of the international community, which spoke of a two-state solution. We became unreasonably reasonable and engaged in a peace process in the early 90s, which unfortunately failed for the simple reason that too much was left to the local belligerent parties to sort it out. And since we are speaking of asymmetrical players, the Israelis felt tempted to dictate the ceiling of the possible and the permissible and the pace of progress, if any. To tell you very frankly, I, for one, as a diplomat, I feel ashamed about the failure of diplomacy in solving the problem. And I, for one, believe that today, if we want to be rational, what is acceptable to the Israelis is not acceptable to us Palestinians, and what is acceptable to us Palestinians is not acceptable to the Israeli side. Yet peace is too important to be left to the Israelis to decide upon. And let me tell you, we've had a big debate in the 60s. Is Israel democratic or not? Some tried to package Israel as a democratic society to make it more adorable and lovable. Others said, no, it cannot be democratic since it's oppressing another people. I, for one, always said, Israel, for the Jewish component of society, is a democratic society, but this is not an alleviating factor, it's an aggravating factor, because what we are subjected to, we the Palestinians, is a democratically supported oppression, suppression, subjugation, etc. The citizen and the voter in Israel knowingly votes, and for the last 3-4 decades, more to the radical extreme right wing, and considers us, we the Palestinian, the indigenous population, as undesirables, as a demographic threat. And when the onslaught on Gaza started in 2023, from the very first week we were saying to the world, what Israel is looking for is the following. They want to render Gaza unlivable, and they want to force people, they call it voluntary migration, force people into opting towards seeking refuge elsewhere. And this is why every day we are seeing the schools, the houses, the hospitals, the universities leveled to the ground. And what remains in Gaza City these days is being destroyed with the world as the impotent witness. Now the question is, and the world is asking today, how was this allowed to happen for 690 days with the world as the impotent witness? And I believe, unfortunately, it's American foreign policy that has rendered the international community totally impotent. America has been shielding the Israeli misbehaving actor in the international system in the UN, issuing veto after veto. And in the past, commentators would say, oh, Israel has shot itself in the foot. They no more say it anymore. But my comment then was to say, it seems to me that Israel has many more than 2 feet to shoot at because they keep getting away with it. Ladies and gentlemen, I will not concede from you. I, for one, am in favor of an imposed solution on the local actors. And the solution is known. You don't need to have brilliant and geniuses in the diplomatic arena. Recently, 2 years ago, the General Assembly in the United Nations overwhelmingly asked the International Court of Justice for an advisory opinion. And the court has issued that the occupation of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza is illegal, unlawful, and should be terminated. And I personally believe that recognizing a Palestinian state along the lines of the 67 boundaries is justice. If I were to address a Jewish audience, I would remind them of what Rabbi Abraham Heschel said in the 60s during the Vietnam War, which he opposed. He said, in a democracy, if a few are guilty, all are responsible. And I believe today that if a Palestinian state is our right, it's the moral duty, it's the ethical obligation of Jewish communities around the world and in Israel, because they, more than anybody else, because they didn't want you to know the truth for decades, they, more than anybody else, know the price that we Palestinians, individually and collectively, have had to pay so that Israel can be carved in the Middle East. So an elegantly imposed solution. By the way, de Gaulle, who is a statesman like they make them no more, in 67 launched an initiative of his own, called it La Concertation à Quatre, the coordination of the 4 major powers. China was not yet in the Security Council. And he wanted those 4 powers to meet, agree on what is desirable, doable, and possible, signal to the local actors what the world expects from them in a very unequivocal manner, which has never happened. Unfortunately, then, the Americans in 67 were not unhappy with the Israeli military victory. It compensated the humiliations of Vietnam. The Soviets, short-sighted like they frequently could be, preferred the bipolar constellation and didn't see why they should give equal status to lesser countries like England and France. The English were not enthusiastic for the de Gaulle initiative simply because it was French to begin with. And my friends, since then we have had a durable process instead of a lasting peace. I personally believe, sir, today a 2-state solution is the least unattractive of a set of very unattractive alternatives. I believe we have been unreasonably reasonable. We aligned ourselves on the international consensus. When we had a peace process, unfortunately, during the theoretical years of peacemaking, the occupation has expanded instead of withdrawing through the elastic growth of the illegal settlements. I think in international relations, the international will should prevail on a national whim or a personal whim. And I say a personal whim because Israeli commentators today would tell us that Netanyahu has been pursuing this useless war on the military level. It's an unnecessary war on the military level in order to perpetuate his political rule, because he's either in power as prime minister or he's in jail because he's convicted for several things in court.
Corruption.
So unfortunately, how is this allowed to happen? Sir, I have always said Palestine, Israel, has been a test between political courage and moral cowardice. And I always hope, ladies and gentlemen, that our rendezvous with history with political courage is not in the too distant future.
Thank you.
Now, let me end with one thought. Ladies and gentlemen, I never belonged to the optimistic school of thought that promises victory and salvation to the oppressed. Unfortunately, history is a cemetery for oppressed people who remained oppressed until they vanished into historical oblivion. So, my appeal to you, and I'm proud to be in Scotland because the Scottish people beyond Balfour of 1917 have been among the first to listen and hear our cry for freedom out of captivity and bondage. My thought for you is the following. Today, we either have one people too many, we the Palestinians, or we have a state which is missing. The response of the international community in the UN, there is a state missing needing to be created. But I have news for you. History is still undecided. And our challenge, collectively and individually, is the following. You have to help history make the right choice. Thank you.
Thank you. History is the cemetery of the oppressed. Incredibly powerful words. Ladies and gentlemen, it's over to you. Please, you know the rules. You've been here, I think, on many occasions at Beyond Borders. Do stick your hands up. We've got a microphone that's going to come round. We're going to take a few questions at a time. Brief questions, some brief responses, please, as well from my distinguished panellists. And that way we'll get in as many as possible. No big, long, winding rants and contributions. Otherwise, the audience will stop you before I get a chance to do so. There was a gentleman here with his hand up, if we can go to him with the glasses. In the middle row. Keep your hand up, please, till the microphone comes to you. There you go. And then there's a wonderful lady here at the front who will be next. Please.
Hello.
And do give your name.
Yes, Peter. A question about negotiations since the 1990s, which obviously is 30-odd years ago now. I personally visited Israel in the mid-90s. When there was an agreement, however small that agreement. And you said negotiations ran into the ground in the 90s. I wanted to ask, why specifically did the Palestinians reject the offer in 2000 and then in 2008 from the Olmert government? I know there's a big issue about Jerusalem. In particular, it's a very, very difficult issue, but I'd like to be illuminated on that.
Okay, we've got the question. We've got to take a few. There's a lady here, I think, at the front. If you keep your hand. I know your name, but for the benefit of everybody else, please, to give us your name.
My name is Anne. Thank you both for powerful comments. You referred to the advisory decision. So what can we in civil society encourage others who are able to produce a mandatory decision? What two things can each of us in this room do within the next month and within the next 3 months? So quick actions on a short-term timescale to seek to achieve something.
Okay, wonderful. I mean, we pass the microphone for the first question. I think was it Toby? From memory? No, was your name?
First with the answer.
Sorry?
You go.
Yeah, you can get on the microphone, young man here, and then we're going to come back. I think.
Hello, my name is Owen.
Owen, forgive me. Owen.
And I've got a question. We all know from many mistakes that the partition of Palestine suggested by the Earl of Peel, William Peel, does not work. So if you were all diplomats, how would have you dealt with the call for a Jewish state in 1947?
Oh, wow, what a question from People's High. I'm going to come back to that question. We'll take them in the order that they came. Afif, could you deal with Peter's question about illuminating him and why the Palestinians, in his words, rejected the offers of the Olmert government?
First of all, sir, you must remember that Rabin was assassinated in 1995. And Israeli commentators would tell you that it was Netanyahu already who was inciting and inflaming Israeli public opinion. There were posters in Israel showing Rabin with a keffiyeh as though he was a Palestinian commando, or with a Nazi hat, etc. So at one moment, during a peace rally, he was shot dead. With the departure of Rabin from the political scene, Peres, who always succeeded in failing in elections, failed in the elections that followed, and Netanyahu has been the recurrent prime minister. And I call him a pyromaniac on a powder keg since the 90s. Concerning the Camp David talks during the last months of Clinton, by the way, Clinton was very pro-Israeli, and when he finished the Camp David talks, he described the attitude of Barak as though it was creative, imaginative, etc., etc. I have never seen so many epithets to describe a political stand. And to tell you frankly, the impression was that he gave us back everything that we were asking for, which was totally untrue. For example, the figure of 95% of the occupied territories that he would have withdrawn from was totally untrue. It was less than 85%. And yet he wanted to maintain a foothold in the Jordan Valley. East Jerusalem was totally unsatisfactory. And so the offer that Barak was making was not as appetizing as it was packaged by Clinton.
And even Rabin said less than a state. They never were offered a state.
Yes. And the foreign minister of Israel then, Ben Ami, is on record to have said in multiple times, including in his book, that had he been a Palestinian, he would have rejected the Barak offer. In 2008, unfortunately, Olmert made an offer, but never in writing. But at the time when he made his offer, and I reminded him in a BBC interview 3-4 months ago, when he made that offer, his popularity rating was 3%. His coalition in government had already fragmented. So Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian president, thought that it was unnecessary, especially that there was no maps that were presented. It was all verbal. With an interlocutor with only 3% popularity rating and with no more a governing coalition, we didn't have a partner at that moment, unfortunately.
Afif,
I am happy that, I'm finishing with that last sentence, I'm happy that Olmert today is active promoting the two-state solution and is very courageous in opposing the Netanyahu policies of today.
Yeah, thank you very much. William, on the questions that were posed.
So I think you've answered perfectly to the question of the two offers. It was never a state. It was never going to have international boundaries. It was never going to have an airport. It was never going to have control of the sea or the air. It was always a stillborn Bantustan that was offered. And it was not unreasonable to refuse it. You can look back and say that with regard to what has happened since, that it was that the options have diminished since, but that's with the benefit of hindsight. There are many points in history one would like to have a TARDIS and make different decisions again, but at the time it didn't seem unreasonable to hope that a better offer could come. With regard to what we can all do, we can do a lot. We can write to our MPs, we can write to our MSPs, we can write to the BBC decrying their incredibly biased coverage every day. And these things work. These things are how politics happens. By using your vote, by using the threat to withdraw a vote, by saying you will cancel your subscription to a newspaper or refuse to pay your license fee to the BBC, you can move the dial. Absolutely. You are not powerless. You can do this. This is a democracy.
Absolutely.
And however, in small ways, we can all contribute to that.
Absolutely. And
you must write, all of you, tonight to your MPs before you go to sleep. Every one of you, an email to your MP, and it will make a difference. And 500 people doing it, it's a big deal.
Indeed. And we're not going to let you off without answering Owen's question. What would you have done when the movement for a Jewish homeland was taking shape and you were in the British government around that cabinet table? Which is Dalrymple might have been a real possibility at one time.
So, I mean, the original sin was the Balfour Declaration, because there was always a mixed world in Palestine. And there's a wonderful Palestinian ethnographer called Tawfiq Kenan, who wrote a wonderful description of the interaction of the different communities and the way, for example, in the early 1900s that there were common shrines. We think of Muslims, Christians and Jews often as being at each other's throats in the Middle East, but Tawfiq Kenan's ethnographical work shows that there were shared sacred spaces before the British turned up. That there was, for example, in Bet Shahor, outside Bethlehem, a church where a church to St. George, supposedly the patron saint of England, actually a Palestinian. And the St. George's shrine was worshipped by the Christians, but that the Muslims came to the same church and offered sheep to Khizr, as they called it's the green saint, and that the local Jewish people came and offered sheep to Elias, the prophet Elias, and that continued until the decade of the Balfour Declaration, when it began to break down. I have still seen Muslims come to that church with sheep. I went to the church having read Tawfiq Kenan. So we broke down that situation. I think, the long and short is that obviously the only just, one thing we haven't talked to as well is that since the creation of the State of Israel, the tensions created by Zionism led to the eviction of Jewish communities across the Muslim world, where they had lived without trouble for many centuries. So from Yemen, from Algeria, from Morocco, from Egypt. And obviously now the only just solution is something that includes everyone. There's no way that you can eradicate or would want to eradicate or would even, that there will be any moral justification for destroying the state of Israel. But you have to do something for the Palestinians who have an equal right. And if Israel has a right to exist, Palestine has at least an equal right to exist alongside it. So some sort of coexistence is the only possibility.
Thank you. I'm going to take some more audience questions. Owen, I don't think I've got the answer to that question either, other than I would say, you're a
politician.
I know.
What would you do?
Not a diplomat. But what I would say, if I was there at the time, I would say that Europe's crimes, and therefore Europe's guilt, should not be the responsibility of the Arab world, and that it should have been Europe's problem to solve, not to impose it with such criminal consequences thereafter. Now, some questions. We've got some people. Yeah, I see two at the back there. We'll get the microphone to them. We're going to take a few questions, and I'll leave it to our distinguished guests to decide which questions are best suited to them. Please.
Thank you. My name's Jahan. William and Humza, you both said there, that this conflict is not taught in our schools, and that's absolutely correct. Why is that, and shouldn't it be? And just for some context, I'm a teacher. Last year I taught at least 140 P7 pupils in Edinburgh the Israel-Palestine conflict. I have a PhD in Middle Eastern Studies. I have the capacity to do that. I also worked with Gotdeck Global Learning Centre, who supported me in that work. But it wasn't straightforward. As with anyone that tries to engage in this conflict, we come under attack. And there were multiple attempts to defame and to report me to my employer and so on. And in the end, we had a letter from UK Lawyers for Israel who tried to shut down an event that we had established for teachers. So teachers actually need support with this, and every time we come to the Scottish Government and Education Scotland and say, produce a national resource, because teachers need the confidence to be able to refer to that resource when they get attacked and say, this is a legitimate resource that is endorsed by the government. That's the only way, actually, that we're going to get teachers to have that bravery to engage with it. But I find it absolutely astonishing, given Balfour's role in all of this, that it has never been part of the curriculum in Scotland in particular.
Thank you.
So what are we going to do about this?
Thank you. Great question. Yes, please.
Good afternoon. When Dalal Arikat was here in May, she suggested that the State of Israel is a state with no borders, or at least not formally recognized borders. Could you comment on that? Is that correct? And in the same kind of spirit, if that is correct, is Elan Papi, who spoke at the Edinburgh Book Festival last week, perhaps correct that the only possible solution is actually a one-state solution? Thank you.
Okay, a one-state solution. We could not get a one-state solution question. We had to get one, of course. Shall we come round down to the front? There's an individual there. We're quite short on time. One behind there. If you just keep your hand up, please. Yeah. And give us your name.
I'd be interested to know what the panel thinks about the gas in the Eastern Mediterranean. I happened to find on the internet randomly that in September 2023, Netanyahu had made contacts with, they'd gone around with getting agreements with Cyprus, Turkey, Egypt, all about the gas in the Eastern Mediterranean, and that there was pressure from Europe to get that gas out since they weren't getting the gas from Russia, which I think may be something to do with the German anti-Palestinian stance. So I want to know whether you think this money has got anything to do with the genocidal approach to this war and the eradication of Palestinian people that's taking place.
Okay. There was just a hand up right beside you, which we'll go to, and then we're going to have to, I'm afraid, I'm not afraid, I'm pleased we're going to come to our panel after that and then wrap up.
I'd like to know what you think about the role of technology in it, say, for instance, the well-known company of Palantir. What's your impression of them, please?
Okay. Can we come to the panel? I'm happy to go to William first and then Afif thereafter.
So in education, I have made this point on Twitter, and I'm told that there are modules that are available for teachers. You can take exams in Middle Eastern studies, and people have responded to me saying that they have studied this, but it is a tiny proportion. It's certainly not something which is prescribed to do. Individual teachers can choose certain papers from certain boards. It's not that it's impossible to do. But overall, in this country, you still learn more about Henry VIII's wives than you do about Palestine, Israel, Kashmir, and Cyprus put together. All the problems we've bequeathed to the world. And we do need an upgrade, a very serious upgrade to our history syllabus, which helps us to understand the world about us. Mm-hmm. I do this pod, which Humza talked about, the Empire pod, and our whole raison d'etre is to provide education in the things that no one learns about in school, not just in this country, but in most countries. All the major political problems of the world come from colonial history, and very, very few of them are taught in any history syllabus, which is bonkers. And so obviously that needs to change. The gas question is a very good one. Egypt signed a deal with Elbit Systems, which is the group. Egypt signed a deal with Israel this week, shamefully, in the middle of this whole genocide, for a neighbouring Arab country to sign a gas deal at this time is appalling. And the British government signed an arms deal with Elbit Systems this week, the same group that Palestine Action were attacking. Mm-hmm. And you can join the dots on that. Mm-hmm. So yes, there's all these brilliant questions. It's wonderful to speak to such an informed audience.
Yes. Over to you, Afif.
Yeah.
I particularly pick up on the one state.
Yeah, first of all, I'm sure that many of you trying to raise awareness on the Palestinian issue, you have had to face the pro-Israeli Inquisition. There is a political and intellectual battle around Israel and Palestine, and the other side, unfortunately, are masters in character assassination, etc. And I think we'll be listening later on to one of the victims of the character assassination, Jeremy Corbyn. With great sadness, I would like to comment on two states or one state solution. First of all, concerning the partition plan, Arafat once invoked the case of the two mothers that were claiming the same baby and went to Solomon. And the real mother refused to have him cut in two and would have rather had him, while the false mother was ready to sacrifice the baby, etc., etc. Hence, you can understand more our attitude in 1947. Yet I was not born in 1947. I was born in 1950. I think in family terms, I was the consolation after the catastrophe, but that's another issue. One state or two states. I grew up politically with the one-state solution, which was our generous offer to those who have chosen to be our enemies. But I'm a political realist while remaining an idealist. I don't think it's doable, at least not in my lifetime. somebody has commented on this issue, one state or two states, by saying, those who speak today of a one-state solution remind me of a person who was beaten by a lightweight boxer and says, next time you send me a heavyweight boxer and you will see what I'll do with him. Having not succeeded in establishing a Palestinian state on 22%, is it realistic to move towards asking for 100%? While the balance of power is not changing, and I think we are all hostages of a certain balance of power. I always say Israel enjoys three overwhelming superiorities in the region. One, it has the monopoly of the nuclear option, with whatever this might imply. Number two, on the conventional level, it has weaponry superior to any combination of Arab forces. Its aviation in '73 was equal to the French and the British, and I suspect on operational levels they are much better because of more frequent combat experience. And number three, they have an unwritten alliance with the Americans, and believe you me, an unwritten alliance with the Americans is even better than a written alliance, because it absolves the patron of being held responsible for the misbehavior of the client state, and it absolves the client state of having responsible behavior so as not to embarrass the patron. And in the American-Israeli relationship, which deserves a session by itself, it's the tail that wags the dog and not the dog that wags the tail. So my friends, with great pain I say, because I know how adorable those people who today invoke the one-state option. It's not doable. I have great respect to Ilan Pappé, who has sacrificed a lot because he tells truth to power. Yet on that issue, I believe that I cannot join him because I am a pragmatic, I consider my school of thought as principled pragmatism, and I believe many of you are principled pragmatists. But allow me to finish by paying tribute to the Britain Palestine Project. It's made by people who are very important in your society. Many of them have had positions of importance in the Middle East. I'm proud to say that our friend Sir Vincent Fien, former ambassador to Malta and to Libya, but consul general in Jerusalem, is among us. Brian Brevati, the director general, is among us, and my daughter, who happens to be one of their supporters and fans, is here. They are doing an excellent job, among others, lobbying the government and the members of parliament in favor of recognition of Palestine. Why is recognition of Palestine important? Because it signals to every actor in the international system that this is the finality of any diplomatic endeavor. We should no more go back to what they used to call the step-by-step approach towards nowhere. No, we have to agree on the finality at the beginning and move fast towards it. And believe you me, ladies and gentlemen, if there is a political will, a territory that was occupied in '67 in 6 days can also be evacuated in 6 days, so that the Israelis can rest on the 7th, and we can, and we can engage in the fascinating journey of national reconstruction and economic recovery. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Afif, for that. We have sadly come to the end of our time. We could have had the whole festival actually on this issue, but I want to thank Beyond Borders, wonderful hosts that they are, Mark Miller, of course, Lady Jaquir, importantly, and the family, and the wonderful organisers, because the Palestine and the issue of Palestine is featured heavily throughout this weekend's programme. Let me say, just as a challenge from William, that none of us are powerless. I will take away the issue about Scottish Government teaching. It was asked by Tehan at the back. And in terms of the role of technology, let me say that I am a firm believer that every single person, community, and we've seen with this with the island of Egg, and every single nation has a responsibility to boycott and to disinvest from those who are involved in the architecture of genocide. And I believe there's a wonderful stall from the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, the local Borders branch, who are advocating this important issue. And this issue of helplessness, I think I get a dozen emails a day to my inbox asking me what can we do because we feel so helpless. I would echo William's words. and that every single person, whatever platform we have, whatever position or status we have, we must use that platform in order to keep speaking, keep advocating and doing whatever's in our gift. Because I can tell you from people who have family in Palestine, my wife's family who are in Gaza itself, that they cannot afford for us to be silent.
Humza, just say for a second about your family in Palestine, because people may not know the whole story.
So, wife Nadia's father is from Gaza, from Derbala. Her family, many of her family were there. We managed to get them out post-October the 7th, or many months post-October the 7th. And the oldest member of our family that we managed to evacuate was a 95-year-old grandmother who was 15, 16 at the time of the Nakba, who was, of course, made a refugee in 1948, went to Gaza and has been made a refugee for the second time in her life, like so many other people in Gaza. So we saw a family there, Nadia's cousin Sally, her 4 children, who are frankly becoming emaciated as we speak. But, and a dreadful situation, even we were able to send money recently, a couple of £100, bought less than 10 items. So you can imagine the real starvation, famine that they're going through. But that point about helplessness, many, many people thought that dismantling the South African apartheid regime was impossible. It was not, and as Nelson Mandela himself said, it always seems impossible until it is done. So it may seem that ending the occupation is impossible, but I guarantee you it will be done. Thank you very much.
William, you were magnificent.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to do a quick turnaround. So just if you're prepared to sit still for a few minutes, what we'll do is just get